Queens residents come from nearly 200 countries and speak nearly 200 languages. At the library, we speak diversity. Join us as we honor immigrant heritage this month. For more information, visit queenslib.org/Immigrant Heritage 22. National Library Week is from April 3rd through April 9th. Stay connected with Queens Public Library by participating in our programs and services, checking out a book, and more. For more information, visit queenslib.org/Library Week 22. Looking for things to do at Queens Public Library? We've compiled 125 of them. Pick up a booklet at your nearest library location or view the list online at queenslib.org/things to do. Share your journey with us on social media using the hashtag QPL125, and you will be automatically entered into a drawing for a free Queens Public Library tote bag. The tax deadline is approaching. Queens Public Library has a resource list of partner organizations who can provide you with virtual tax help this year. Visit our blog on queenslibrary.org for more information.
April is the cruelest month. Welcome to Queens Public Library's talk with Eduardo Ballerini and his narration of T.S. Eliot's 1922 legendary poem, The Wasteland, and other readings, including the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. The Financial Times wrote, "What's so impressive about Ballerini's reading is the way he ducks portentousness, always a risk with Eliot, and captures the sense of play that runs throughout The Wasteland. Register and tone are constantly switching. The tempo alters. Snatches of demotic English give way to German and French. Sometimes Ballerini proceeds trippingly, catching the gossipy, mocking, conspiratorial interludes in the poem. At other times, he is mournful and beseeching. Also included here are poems such as the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock and The Journey of the Magi, all of which will pay repeated listening." Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Brian Alessandro. Hey, Eduardo. Welcome to Culture
Connection.
So Culture Connections, curated by Daniel Zaleski, and now in its 9th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and more. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. We would also like to wish a happy birthday to our supporter of Culture Connection, April Sandmeyer. Happy birthday, April.
So my colleague here with me tonight, for those of you who don't know him, is Brian Alessandro. For those of you who don't know, Brian has written for Interview Magazine, Newsday, Pank, Huffington Post, and has recently adapted Edmund White's A Boy's Own Story into a graphic novel for Top Shelf Productions, which will be released this fall. Additionally, Brian co-edited an anthology of essays and interviews about William S. Burroughs, which will be published this summer. Brian is also the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the literary journal, The New Engagement. His first novel, The Unmentionable Man, was published in 2015 by Came Press, and his first feature film, Afghan Hound, was produced by Maria Media in 2011.
Thank you, Lawrence. You make me sound so fancy. For more than 3 decades, Lawrence Fromer, my co-host this evening, has been involved in the arts, urban planning, social services, and other projects with groups and organizations as diverse as, and in no particular order as, the Municipal Art Society, the Living Theater, the New York City Department of Transportation, the Bronx Museum, Save Chelsea and the Historic Districts Council, the East 4th Street Cultural District, the Gay Cable Network, PBS, the Times Square Alliance, and the Mental Health Awareness and Creative Arts Gallery in Hudson, New York.
So tonight we are very excited to have Eduardo Ballerini back with us on Culture Connection to celebrate International Poetry Month. Viewers may remember his wonderful reading of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol on Culture Connection in December, and his reading of Edgar Allan Poe on a previous Halloween edition, and his captivating appearance just about a year ago with his father, the noted poet Luigi Ballerini, for last year's Poetry Month edition.
And I get to say a little bit more about Eduardo. Eduardo Ballerini is an actor, a narrator, a writer, and a director. He is best known on screen for his roles as the hot-headed chef in the cult classic Dinner Rush and as junkie Corky Corporale on The Sopranos. He will soon be returning to screens in the upcoming series Retreat for Hulu. Behind the mic, Eduardo is a two-time winner and three-time nominee of the Audio Publishers Association Best Male Narrator Award, and the voice of over 300 audiobooks from classics by Tolstoy, Stendhal, Walt Whitman, Jack London, Dostoevsky, and others, to modern bestsellers Jess Walter, Amor Towles, Richard Powers, Andre Asselman, James Patterson, David Baldacci, and others. In 2019, Eduardo recorded the Unabridged Hebrew Bible. This led to a profile in the New York Times, which called him, understandably, the voice of God. That article mentioned that Eduardo, while an undergraduate at Wesleyan University, used to listen to T.S. Eliot reading his poems. When the estate of T.S. Eliot discovered this, they contacted Eduardo to record the centenary edition of The Wasteland in connection with Faber Publishers, which leads us here tonight. Thank you again, Eduardo, for joining us.
Yes, welcome back, Eduardo.
Thank you. This is my pleasure. It's always a lot of fun to be with you guys. I'm gonna flesh out that story about me listening to T.S. Eliot just a bit, and then we'll jump in because I think it's actually kind of funny. I'm sort of an accidental Eliot fan, and how I got to this point is completely kind of random. So here's what happened. I was at Wesleyan University, as you mentioned, and if I'm remembering correctly, I had a big fight with my girlfriend. And so I wanted to get off campus. I just wanted to get away. So I walked down the hill. Wesleyan is in Middletown, Connecticut. The campus is up on the hill and the town is down below. And I ended up at the Middletown Public Library, which I'd never been in before. And it's a small town public library, as you can imagine. And I'm kind of walking around and checking things out. And then I end up in front of this bin of vinyl records. I don't know if libraries still have this, but I think we're all old enough to remember the days when you'd go into a library and there'd just be records. Sure. It'd be like The Nutcracker and Peter, Paul and Mary, whatever. You know, it's like somehow in the back of this stack was T.S. Eliot. And I picked up this album, and I didn't know much about Eliot. And I see this owlish looking man who was like in this wool suit, kind of hunched over. And I decided to check it out of the library. So I go downstairs, I get a library card, I take it back to my dorm room. But the thing is, I didn't have a record player. So this album just sat on my desk for like a week. And you know those Renaissance paintings where the eyes like follow you around the room? Sure. That's what this record cover was like, sitting on my desk. So finally I get around to borrowing a record player from somebody down the hall. I plug it in and I listen to it. And I'm blown away by what I hear. I didn't understand a word of it, but I knew that something was happening here. And he, Eliot, I have to say, has the most intriguing voice. It's for those who haven't listened to his original recordings of his works, I highly recommend it. Right. It's like this sort of haunting and haunted, spectral kind of voice coming at you. And I just sat there and I was mesmerized listening to this thing. So I immediately transferred it onto a cassette, and then I would walk around campus listening to T.S. Eliot. And I developed this kind of Eliot obsession. So now I'm going to fast forward, many, many years later, that I get this call from the estate of T.S. Eliot to do these recordings. Just kind of blew me away. And it was such a great honor and a privilege, and I'm eternally grateful to Faber and the estate of T.S. Eliot.
You must have just had a precognitive moment with me, because that was going to actually be my first question, which was actually two parts. The first part of my first question was going to be, what did it feel like to have that kind of honor bestowed upon you, to have the T.S. Eliot estate and Faber Publishers personally ask you to record your narration for this most famous of his poems? It must be humbling.
Yeah, it was enormously humbling, but to get a little bit more personal, I'll say this, is that so that article that you mentioned came out in May of 2020. which was, as we all remember, right at the beginning of lockdowns and homeschooling and all that nightmare, right? And so the estate of T.S. Eliot then contacted me, I'm going to say just a couple of weeks after. So, there we were locked down in our homes, not knowing what the hell was going on. And to get that call for me was like a breath of fresh air. It was like this lifeline out of this very dark place. And in a weird way, it reminded me of when I was an undergraduate back at Wesleyan, and I just sort of randomly found this thing, which also became kind of a line to something else as well. So there was this kind of bookending thing that happened with Eliot. So Eliot has played this big role in my life somehow.
Very profound. So the second half of my first question was really, I wanted to pick your brain about this incredible event that's happening in London. They'll be celebrating the centenary of the Wasteland this month over the course of 6 days, with 22 of its churches holding public responses to the work called Fragments. And these will not be straight readings, as I understand it, but rather artistic or musical reimaginings. To our viewers, if you're interested in learning more about this, the address is thewasteland2022.com. And Eduardo, what are your thoughts about that incredible honor that they're bestowing on him?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just I feel like we're getting some feedback on something, so I'm just going to shut this off. I hope that's not me. It's always embarrassing when these things happen. So Fragments, yes, as you said, is this festival in London, which also has the blessings of the T.S. Eliot estate. And I've heard some snippets of what people have done, and it is remarkable. And they've really reimagined this poem, and they're doing these readings in these churches. I wish I were there. But it made me think that what's so great about poetry is that it can be so interpretive, right? In that sense, it's like music, right? You can have this famous piece of music, and people can perform it in different ways. Or to an extent, it's like theater, where you can take, Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet, and you can imagine it all these different ways, right? You have this original text, which I don't think happens so much with novels, right, that are narrated. There's usually one recording of these things. Maybe if it's a classic, there are many. But what's so great about poetry is that it can be reinterpreted over and over, and it speaks also to the kind of the flexibility of the poem, that the Wasteland 100 years later is still relevant, says something about not only the work itself, but about the nature of poetry.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Lawrence? Oh, you're muted.
He kind of answered my original question as well. Do you want to say anything? Well, I think, Brian, we should just move ahead.
Sure. So in addition to The Wasteland, Eduardo, you also narrate another Eliot work for this recording, correct? Including, or several other works, really. It's the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, Portrait of a Lady, the Boston Evening Transcript, The Hollow Men, Journey of the Magi, and Animula. Can you talk about the different approaches in each piece? Did you take a different approach for each piece?
Well, there are many recordings of Eliot, as we've sort of alluded to. There's some rather famous ones. There's a Fiona Shaw reading of The Wasteland, which is just wonderful. There's a Jeremy Irons, along with Eileen Atkins. They do something which is great too. There's an Alec Guinness recording of it. I guess that came out in the 70s. There's even a Viggo Mortensen recording of The Wasteland, which I did not know. And in addition to these sort of bold-faced names who have done it, there are hundreds of other recordings out there. And so I listened to a lot of these before I did my recording. It was very hard, I'll confess, not to hear Eliot himself in my ear, because that was this sort of seminal moment. And so all these lines, which I had listened to far more than I had read on printed paper. So when I see them, I sort of hear him. One thing I tried to do is bring it to a sort of a 2022 place where the kind of narration that we do now would be appropriate, but at the same time to honor his original recordings. And so the true diehard fans may recognize a few lines where I really sort of follow his original read. But I wanted to find a way to sort of balance these two, to nod to the past and to bring it to the future at the same time. But there are some incredible readings out there. There really are.
I have to say, in preparation for this program, it was Lawrence who turned me on to so many of them, just to start to get a clearer idea of what's been done already. None of them are as good as yours, I'm sure. So,
I love that, Fiona Shaw did her reading at the old Liberty Theater on 40. She performed it there, right?
Yeah.
And that was when it was still kind of a derelict theater before, they had completely revived it.
Right.
And and then she's done it also like as a video recording and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think she did that maybe over in Ireland, and it's brilliant. She performed it in Madison Square Park.
Did she?
I think maybe just a year or so before the pandemic, which was.
But the operative word there, and I think you're right, is she performed it.
Right.
And I really think that she is, of the ones that I've heard, is sort of the most, let's call it theatrical.
Yes.
Of
Yes.
them.
Yeah. I mean, she really, and I think, poetry, they always talk about in acting is, it's kind of hard, if you don't know what you're doing, to make it translated onto stage,
Right.
I mean, I don't know if you agree, Eduardo, or not. But
I'm going to agree with the statement, poetry is hard.
Okay.
Every high school student who's ever tried to write a line of poetry has learned that poetry is hard.
Sure. So I know, we're talking about the Wasteland a lot, but also in this recording that you've done, as we mentioned before, you included some other pieces. And I was wondering if now you might want to read for us your selection from the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock.
I would love to. So.
This is going to be a selection, or it's the whole thing?
No, I think we can do the whole thing. It's not that long.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. That's really
So the floor is yours, Eduardo. We'll mute ourselves.
Okay, thank you. So by way of introduction, I'm sure a lot of people know this is the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which could be the most quoted of all of Eliot's works. You'll probably recognize a lot of lines in here, which you've heard 1,000 times. So I'm reading out of my old college edition, which this was not necessarily the album cover that I ran into, but this is what Eliot looked like when I first encountered him. And I'll have some thoughts on that at the end. But anyway. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights and one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. And indeed there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions and for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of a toast and tea. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. And indeed, there will be time to wonder, do I dare and do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute, there is time for decisions and revisions which a minute will reverse. For I have known them all already, known them all. I've known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I know the voices dying with a dying fall, beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? And I have known the eyes already, known them all, the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I am formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways? And how should I presume? And I have known the arms already, known them all, arms that are braceleted and white and bare, but in the lamplight, downed with light brown hair. Is it perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? Arms that lie along a table or wrap about a shawl, and should I then presume? And how should I begin? Shall I say, I have gone at dusk through narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows? I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. And the afternoon, the evening sleeps so peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired, or it malingers. Stretched on the floor here beside you and me, should I, after tea and cakes and ices, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? But though I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed, though I have seen my head grown slightly bald, brought in upon a platter, I am no prophet, and here's no great matter. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker. And in short, I was afraid. And would it have been worth it after all? After the cups, the marmalade, the tea, among the porcelain, among some talk of you and me, would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll it toward some overwhelming question, to say, I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all, I shall tell you all? If one, settling a pillow by her head, should say, that is not what I meant at all. That is not it at all. And would it have been worth it after all? Would it have been worthwhile after the sunsets and the dooryards and the sprinkled streets, after the novels, after the teacups, after the skirts that trail along the floor, and this and so much more? It is impossible to say just what I mean. But as if a magic lantern through nerves and patterns on a screen, would it have been worthwhile if one, settling a pillow or throwing off a shawl and turning toward the window, should say, that is not it at all. That is not what I meant at all. No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. I'm an attendant, Lord, one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two, advise the prince, no doubt an easy tool, deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious and meticulous, full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse. At times, indeed, almost ridiculous. Almost at times, the fool. I grow old. I grow old. I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach? I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. I have seen them riding seaward on the waves, combing the white hair of the waves blown back when the wind blows the water white and black. We have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by sea-girls wreathed with seaweed red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown.
That was fantastic, Eduardo. Thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
You had some thoughts that you wanted to share about Prufrock.
Yeah, well, my first thought was that when as I mentioned a couple of times now, this is the Eliot that I was introduced to, this old man, right? And when I heard his recordings, they were recorded by roughly this older man as well. It wasn't until years later that I discovered that he wrote Prufrock at the age of 21 or 22.
Yeah.
and yet it's the voice of an old man somehow, which just kind of it sort of further blew me away. That like, how did this young man write from this old perspective? Which anyway,
and you know, I mean, he captures, I think, an existential terror that everybody feels, and that is growing old, becoming obsolete, losing one's vitality,
right?
And looks, and beauty, and passion, and it's something that's universal. And I think the sort of sensitive soul of an artist can maybe get that at such a young age.
Right.
And I think that the World War I had really, wrecked him, as it did so many people. I believe he had some kind of nervous breakdown, and kind of part of his therapy was to write this out on the beach of Margate. That was my understanding. So it could age a person probably a lot.
Yeah. But I just remember it sort of thinking like, what kind of young man is really walking around the world thinking of the world in these terms, right? And it's really a different kind of sensibility. I mean, there's a lot of sort of youth in it as well, right? There's this sort of, I don't know, sexual frustration that you hear in there. There's this question of like, is he the leading man in the play? Meaning, is he Prince Hamlet, or is he just one of the attendant lords off to the side? And he's sort of trying to feel his way through life. But it really is the overarching thing that struck me about this is that here's a soul, an old soul, quite literally just trapped in this young man's body.
I interviewed Zadie Smith about 4 years ago, and she was talking about White Teeth, and she wrote about the character Archie, who was based on her father in part. Am I still here? Okay. Yeah. I disappeared for a second on my screen. And he was an older man. And she said it has to do with creative voyeurism, being able to write about someone so different from yourself. And a 22-year-old writing about a man experiencing obsolescence is quite creatively voyeuristic. I want to return to The Wasteland. As we said earlier, this is the centenary. As you were recording this, did you feel the weight of that?
Yes, I mean, in terms of like the importance of I felt kind of honored that, as I mentioned, that the estate in Faber had called me and asked me to do this, and I was aware that this was going to get some attention, that they were going to promote this, it was going to be out there, and that it would probably, the Eliot people out there would have their thoughts on it, right? You have, so there's some Eliot diehards who will have an opinion. And you kind of sort of brace yourself for that. And for the most part, it's been positive, although a couple of people really wrote me to say they were not happy.
There'll always be a few.
It's fine. But I did feel that. But, because of the timing, that it came to me in the beginning of the pandemic, there was also that weight of that wasteland. And now, of course, we're watching the world exist in another wasteland, and it feels like we're hopping from tragedy to tragedy. And what I remember thinking was, when I went back to the wasteland and looked at it again, was it's obviously, it's got a lot of layers, and there's some very dark ones. Yeah, but it also has some very playful ones.
Yes, which, as Financial Times critic,
which actually surprised me, because I hadn't read it in a while and I'd sort of forgotten that. But there's some very light moments in it, and there's some very kind of Zen moments in it as well. I mean, it ends with that kind of Buddhist chant, but which I think is why it's sort of this poem that has existed so long. It works on so many levels. At any given time or in any given mood, you can find something in it that really jumps out and works.
Well, there's so much going on there, and it's so many different strands. And I think, the world has been shattered in the way that, World War I really had for a lot of people. And he's trying to tie them back together, maybe, or see the context for it. I have been hearing various people saying how this really has resonated for them during the pandemic, you know, and it's funny because I think the thing that is closest to it was probably about 100 years ago as well, and that's the influenza, epidemic, and our lives have really changed, in many ways. And I know a lot of people talk about their mental health, and obviously The Wasteland is written by a person whose mental health has been pretty, shattered.
Right. The other thing that jumped out at me is when I went back to it was this, what I call this sort of Tower of Babel effect, in that, there's this fragmentation, and there's this fragmentation of language, and there's this use of all these different languages. You have the German, the French, you have this sort of Cockney sort of thing happening in these scenes. And it really, it made me think of like, okay, maybe this is the sort of the moment where God comes and shatters the tower and says, you're for here on out never going to be able to communicate with each other again. And you're going to have to live in fragments, right? And we struggle now so deeply with these sort of linguistic questions still. And this, I don't want to dive into the front pages of the news too much, but I've really been noticing how language is such a big question in this conflict. Like, in Ukraine, it's like, who speaks which language and which dialect? And it is this kind of like Tower of Babel moment where it's like, okay, people who were once all together, your language is going to be shattered, and therefore you're not going to understand each other. And so this poem comes along and is working on these themes and so many more. And it feels also like the different parts have these different poetic feels to them. And it feels like this very fragmented, these fragments I've shored against my ruins, as the line says. It's like, this is, if we can't put ourselves together, we're doomed, right? We're in this wasteland.
And that's what conflict does, is it's even a fragment of, different narratives, different, look at the way that the Russian government is spinning the whole thing versus, right. It's almost like you can't believe it's the same story.
Right. But so I was really amazed once again at how many levels this poem worked on. And then to go back and listen to, sorry, Brian, and to go back and listen to all these different recordings was fascinating too, and to see how people interpreted it.
Fun research on some level. Yeah. And this is a question I know you've been asked before as an actor. I'm sure Lawrence has asked you this question several times, but I have not yet interviewed you, so I'm going to ask it.
This is our fourth time together.
Is it really? Oh,
yeah.
Great.
Do you prepare for readings similarly to the way you prepare for a role in a film or on stage or in a movie?
Wow, actually, I've never been asked that question. It's a great question. I'm going to say no, in that because you're only dealing with one element, voice, there's so many things that you're not preparing. You're not preparing a look. You're not preparing a walk. You're not preparing all that physicality. And also because it is a solo performance, it's a solo show as opposed to interacting with all these other people. One thing I do, this is a general comment about narration, is that obviously I prepare an understanding of the text, but I don't want to understand everything before I jump in and record it. I like to leave a little room for it to be surprised. I don't want to know it so well back and forth that I think, oh, I'm done with this. This was a little different because these were poems that, many years ago I had memorized and back and forth, and these were sort of deep in my DNA. But poetry is different that way. It's a bit like singing a song or, doing a monologue. You can come back to it and find new things. And I'm sure if I were to record these poems 5 years from now or 10 years from now, they'd come out differently.
Sure. More than likely. My question was actually a two-parter. And Lawrence, if you could forgive me, I want to squeeze the second half in. Your father, for those who don't know, is a very famous poet, Luigi Ballarini. Yeah. I'm wondering how much has his own work informed your development to love poetry, to narrate poetry?
Yeah. It certainly had an effect. Both my parents are academics. My mother's an art historian. My father is a writer, a poet. And I certainly grew up with a lot of poets around the house. There was a lot of poetry talk, a lot of talk about language. And I was dragged to numerous poetry readings as a child. I'm not sure how much I enjoyed them when I was 6 years old, but something was happening there. And sure, it's been a part of my life at the beginning. As far as his work in particular, it's hard for me to comment on that because I'm not a writer, so it's not like I'm writing in the shadow of a parent's work. But it's certainly influenced me, and it's something for which I'm very grateful ultimately. It's like when you drag kids to museums and they think, oh, why are we here? Why are we here? And then you're like, just you wait, a few decades from now, you'll appreciate this.
We were really lucky to have both you and your father just about a year ago for Poetry Month, and that was a really wonderful conversation, as I remember, for the three of us. It was really quite engaging. So kind of coming back to the various roles, I think a lot of people have talked about this. That even though we were talking about performing on stage and taking poetry, but a lot of people have viewed this almost as a piece of theater. The Wasteland, I think, because there's so many voices, there's many characters in it. So taking this, and I know that you and I have talked about this before, but and I think you were just maybe referencing it a bit also with Brian, but are you actually looking at each role in the way an actor does, and sort of like, I have a through line, I have an objective, I have
within the
that's
text?
a lot of work to do it simultaneously.
You mean within the text of the poem?
Yeah. Each character in this story.
Absolutely. I know we're gonna read a section of The Wasteland towards the end of this program, and there's a beautiful section where there is this overlapping dialogue between these people, and it's one of my favorite sections of the work, and it's very much the sort of character informed.
Sure.
Now I'm going to ask you guys a question. Do you happen to know, either of you, if there is has anybody attempted to make a stage play out of The Wasteland besides just readings? Well, or has anybody tried to make a film?
Fiona Shaw is the closest thing that I can think of.
But that's a solo performance.
Right. That's.
I don't know, and it's a conceptually compelling piece. I'm really surprised that after 100 years, it hasn't been done yet.
You would think that somebody at some point would have said, "Let's mount The Wasteland."
Yeah.
And you have
a lot of characters, a lot of stuff. It'd be pretty sprawling, right?
Why don't we do it? Lawrence, let's do it.
Let's put on a show in the barn.
It would have to be of quite an experimental nature. But,
I think it would really lend it. That was, it's kind of this stream of consciousness. I guess that was kind of a thing I was thinking. So you can approach it with these various characters, right? At the same time, I've heard people say that it's almost like somebody's mind who's just going on and jumping from thing to thing, the way that it can happen to people.
Right.
It's kind of like you could look at it both those ways, I guess.
Yeah.
Sure. Actually, you answered the question I was going to put to you about the sort of multi-voiced aspect of The Wasteland. So, Lawrence, if you want to move right into Hollow Men.
Yeah. So I think, another piece that's included in this wonderful, edition that you've released is The Hollow Men. And I think maybe now would be a good time for you.
Let's do it. Let me find it.
Is this going to be in its entirety, or
this is even shorter than Prufrock?
Okay,
so I would say yeah.
Okay, sure.
And again, we'll come back at the end to discuss some things. But anyway, the Hollow Men. We are the Hollow Men. We are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. Alas, our dried voices, when we whisper together, are quiet and meaningless as wind in dry grass, or rats' feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed force, gesture without motion. Those who have crossed with direct eyes to death's other kingdom remember us, if at all, not as lost violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuffed men. Eyes I dare not meet in dreams, in death's dream kingdom these do appear. There the eyes are sunlight on a broken column. There is a tree swinging, and voices are in the winds singing, more distant and more solemn than a fading star. Let me be no nearer in death's dream kingdom. Let me also wear such deliberate disguises, rat's coat, crow's skin, crossed staves, in a field behaving as the wind behaves, no nearer. Not that final meeting in the twilight kingdom. This is the dead land. This is the cactus land. Here the stone images are raised. Here they receive the supplication of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a fading star. Is it like this in death's other kingdom? Walking alone, at the hour when we are trembling with tenderness. Lips that would kiss form prayers to broken stone. The eyes are not here. There are no eyes here in this valley of dying stars, in this hollow valley, this broken jaw of our lost kingdoms. In this last of meeting places, we grope together and avoid speech, gathered on this beach of the tumid river. Sightless, unless the eyes reappear as the perpetual star, multifoliate rose of death's twilight kingdom, the hope only of empty men. Here we go round the prickly pear, prickly pear, prickly pear. Here we go round the prickly pear at 5 o'clock in the morning. Between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act, falls the shadow. For thine is the kingdom. Between the conception and the creation, between the emotion and the response, falls the shadow. Life is very long. Between the desire and the spasm, between the potency and the existence, between the essence and the descent, falls the shadow. For thine is the kingdom. For thine is, life is, for thine is the, this is the way the world ends, this is the way the world ends, this is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper.
Really beautiful, Eduardo.
That's really really wonderful.
Of course, sorry, Lawrence. I was going to comment on that closing line, of course, is sort of become one of the most famous of the past 98, 97 years since the publication of that poem in 1925, thereabouts.
Yeah.
And another response to World War I, right?
Sorry to jump in. Eve, I can't see Brian and Lawrence. I don't know if we're the split screen has somehow gotten lost, but so.
You could hear me though, right?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
We'll just be a disembodied voice.
Now we're getting to the wasteland.
Yeah. I was going to say from the existential void,
Right.
that is upon us again. Well, we did talk about. I was going to ask you a little more about the theatrical stuff, but I think we kind of already dealt with that. When I was kind of preparing for this, and you were asking about has there been a stage production other than Fiona Shaw's, solo piece? I didn't find much evidence of that. I did find dance pieces inspired of it and musical, works and things that also put together the music and the narration.
Yeah.
Things like that. I also found something several compendiums of artwork, visual artwork, and I think they even had a whole exhibit of work inspired by the poem in Margate. In England, where he kind of went to recover from his nervous breakdown, after the war and whatnot. The
Hollow Men, sorry to jump in.
Yeah.
The Hollow Men, to me, it always reminds me, it was used so effectively in that film Apocalypse Now.
Okay. Well, that would make sense, right? I mean, yeah.
Right. They're going to look for Colonel Kurtz, and they find him, lost in the jungle, gone completely mad, and he's reading The Hollow Men.
It's been about 10 years since I've seen the film. I have to revisit it, though. That's great. That's a great insight and a reminder.
Right, but, so Apocalypse Now being about, Vietnam and that whole fiasco, it was like, it's amazing to see these works jump into pop culture that way, And obviously, a director like Francis Ford Coppola is a very, intelligent, learned man, and he knew of this work, but that it was end up in there, that is this sort of central moment to this character, that when they find him, this is what he's reading,
Naturally. Yeah.
Speaking of pop culture, I've seen that it's become like a video game or something, like for gamers.
The Hollow Men?
No, the Wasteland. Sorry.
Oh, God.
Yeah,
no, like, oh God. Well, that could happen. Anything is possible, right?
Anything's possible, yeah.
And there's even one that merges it with a film, kind of a noir detective scenario. And there's something that's like a comic book. It's really interesting. I mean, this is something that has generated a lot of inspiration. And so we did talk a little bit about the other readings, and have it sounds like you have heard them, right?
I have. And it's interesting when you have sort of celebrity readings of things like Jeremy Irons or Alec Guinness, where they're wonderful, amazing, accomplished performers. I always find it hard not to be listening to Jeremy Irons or Alec Guinness
rather than the voice of the poem. Yeah,
kind of.
Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting because they're fantastic. They're masters at what they do, and they bring a lot of attention to it. But at the same time, so much of it becomes about what they do.
Sure.
And what's interesting is in the field of narration is that there's this sort of required semi-anonymity that kind of comes with it, because you don't really want to get in the way of the work too much. It's like Jeremy Irons has that, beautiful, such a unique voice.
Sure.
And when he's reading it, it's like, oh, it's Jeremy Irons.
Yeah. His Jeremy Irons-ness comes through.
Right.
So obviously The Wasteland has been read multiple times, and you've covered a good deal of classics in your career as a narrator. Aside from The Wasteland, do you generally listen to other interpretations of works that you're going to ultimately be covering? Just to get a sense of how perhaps other artists might have done it differently than you, or
the only time that really exists is when you're talking about a classic, because if a book, even something 5-10 years old comes out, it's very unlikely they're going to be re-recording it. So the only ones that really happens to are classics. I did War and Peace a couple of years ago, and I did listen. It's rather long, so I didn't listen to the entire recordings by other people, but I did listen to some sections to get a sense of it. I also listened to there was a wonderful BBC 8-hour radio program of War and Peace, which I listened to. But I do find it helpful to find out what other people are doing with texts. I don't think you want to exist in a vacuum that way. And I don't think you want to be careful of not to repeat what somebody else has done. You do want to try to bring something new to it. But it's really only limited to classics where you'll find that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did Walt Whitman, and there were a number of Walt Whitman readings, as you can imagine, as well.
Yeah. Well, you kind of touched on something that you don't want to be. I guess, are you ever afraid of being overly influenced? Particularly if there's I always think of God help anyone who's going to play Stanley in Streetcar Named Desire, because it's kind of been defined forever, right?
Right.
Well, I used to say that about the MC in Cabaret, and then I thought Alan Cumming completely redid it, and it was amazing. So it shows you can.
I think with any of these things, if enough time goes by, that a new generation comes along and doesn't really know about the old one, right? I mean, I think Hollywood, this is kind of its bread and butter. It does remakes, and it's like hoping nobody knew that there was an original 30 years ago. Or 50 years ago. But I do think it's important to listen to other voices and listen to what people are doing, certainly. And you can get inspired. And I had a teacher once who said, it's okay to steal, just steal good. And I've always loved that. It's like, you can take things from other people. Just make sure it's the good stuff that you take.
Well, you kind of said you do want to leave a bit of it open for reading. So how much of the text, do you need to understand or study? Because it sounds like you do a certain amount of that. I mean, what's the balance, I guess?
That's a good question.
And if you look at critical analysis, academic analysis.
Yeah, again, we got to differentiate between the classics, which will have all these things written about them, and a novel that's about to come out in 2 months from now. Cool. You're lucky to get 3 reviews on Goodreads, to give you some sort of insight into what's happening. Certainly you want to have a basic handle on story, characters, themes, and let's call it mood, right? And then from there, I think there really does need to be some room for surprise and improvisation and a little sort of jazz to it, where you're going to say oh, I wasn't expecting this sentence, let's see what we can do with it, So you do have to strike that balance. And, there's a whole range of how people approach these things. Some people prepare probably too much, and then some people prepare not enough, and that comes through as well.
My follow-up question actually was something you also just addressed. So I'm going to allow Lawrence to jump to his next question.
Okay.
So aside from The Wasteland,
Mhm.
what other work of Eliot's, because it does seem you're quite familiar with it, most personally resonates with you, and I guess why?
Well, I think it's Prufrock. I really do. It was the one that I listened to the most back in college. And I remember being so struck by that stanza about, "No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be."
Hmm.
And I remember feeling sort of almost queasy about it. It was just kind of like, wait a minute, aren't we all supposed to be the star of our own show? Like, aren't we supposed to all be the Hamlet of our own production? And this idea that a person would say, you know what? I'm not Hamlet. I'm the guy who stands off to the side. And then he went on to say, and I'm ridiculous, and I'm the fool, and it really sort of, it had a profound effect on me. It planted the seed that, like, you better somehow be in charge of your life to some degree. And I felt like that was what he was saying there. That was my interpretation.
To that point, to follow up with Lawrence's question, Prufrock is probably Eliot's most well-known work after The Wasteland.
Yeah.
You spoke very thoughtfully just now about how and why it appeals to you personally. Why do you think do you think those are the same reasons why it's achieved the level of attention and reverence that it's been
It
able
seems,
to?
yeah, I mean, I'm going to guess that it's sort of well, maybe not anymore because curriculums have changed, but, every high school was sort of had Prufrock in there. And I think one of the reasons actually is it's also a very fun poem. It has these great rhythms and rhymes. And I feel like it's something that teenagers can sort of grab onto more easily than, say, The Wasteland, which I think you have to be a little more mature to understand. But, these lines, in a minute there is time for visions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. It almost sounds like you're sort of scatting or you're playing drums to it,
You almost sounded like Lin-Manuel Miranda for a second.
There you go. I mean, I think there's I think what we should do, we were asking about the theatrical version of The Wasteland. Let's call Lin-Manuel and see if we
I think that would be amazing.
Right.
I just finally saw Hamilton last night.
Okay.
I mean, I always assumed I would end up, if I saw it, it'd be the Podunk Community Theater production, like in the year 5000 or something. But
Right.
and it just, yes, I agree 1,000,000%.
Yeah, it has this rhythm. It has this sort of like rap-like quality to it.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that it's interesting. I think this piece would actually lend it to itself very well, and rap can work with stream of consciousness as well.
Yes.
Yeah. I think so. So listen, I mean, I'm hoping we still have a little time at least for Q&A from our
Yeah,
listeners.
I wanted to read a little of The Wasteland after we
Oh, well,
talked.
yes, yeah. Well, how do we feel? Are we going to? Because we really want to read The Wasteland.
I think we should probably jump in because it's probably 4 or 5 minutes of Wasteland here. So
Sure. Let's do it.
All right.
Okay.
One. The burial of the dead. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. Summer surprised us, coming over the Starnberger Sea with a shower of rain. We stopped in the colonnade and went on in sunlight into the Hofgarten and drank coffee and talked for an hour. Bin gar keine Russen, stamm aus Litauen, echt Deutsche. And when we were children, staying at the Archduke's, my cousins, he took me out on a sled, and I was frightened. He said, Marie, Marie, hold on tight. And down we went. In the mountains there you feel free. I read much of the night and go south in the winter. What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? Son of man, you cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images where the sun beats and the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and the dry stone no sound of water. Only there is shadow under this red rock. Come in under the shadow of this red rock, and I will show you something different from either your shadow at morning striding behind you or your shadow at evening rising to meet you. I will show you fear in a handful of dust. Frisch wärst der Wind, der Heimat zu, mein Irish Kind, wo weilest du? You gave me hyacinths first a year ago. They called me the Hyacinth Girl. Yet when we came back later from the hyacinth garden, your arms full and your hair wet, I could not speak, and my eyes failed. I was neither living nor dead, and I knew nothing. Looking into the heart of light, the silence. O du Leer das Meer. Madame Sosostris, famous clairvoyante, had a bad cold. Nevertheless, is known to be the wisest woman in Europe, with a wicked pack of cards. Here, said she, is your card, the drowned Phoenician sailor. Those are pearls that where his eyes look. Here is Belladonna, the lady of the rocks, the lady of situations. Here is the man with 3 staves, and here the wheel. And here is the one-eyed merchant, and this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see. I do not find the hanged man. Fear death by water. I see crowds of people walking round in a ring. Thank you. If you see dear Mrs. Equitone, tell her I bring the horoscope myself. One must be so careful these days. Unreal city, under the brown fog of a winter dawn, a crowd flowed over London Bridge, so many. I had not thought death had undone so many. Sighs, short and infrequent, were exhaled, and each man fixed his eyes before his feet, flowed up the hill and down King William Street, to where St. Mary Woolnoth kept the hours with a dead sound on the final stroke of 9. There I saw one I knew, and stopped him, crying, Stetson! You who were with me in the ships at Miley! That corpse you planted last year in your garden, has it begun to sprout? Will it bloom this year? Or has the sudden frost disturbed its bed? Oh, keep the dog far hence, that's friend to men, or with his nails he'll dig it up again. You, hypocrite lecteur, mon semblable, mon frère. 2. A game of chess. The chair she sat in, like a burnished throne, glowed on the marble, where the glass held up by standards wrought with fruited vines from which a golden Cupidon peeped out. Another hid his eyes behind his wing. Doubled the flames of 7-branched candelabra, reflecting the light upon the table as the glitter of her jewels rose to meet it. From satin cases poured in rich profusion. And vials of ivory and colored glass, unstoppered, lurked her strange synthetic perfumes, unguent, powdered, or liquid troubled, confused and drowned the sense in odors. Stirred by the air that freshened from the window, these ascended, and fattening the prolonged candle flames, flung their smoke into the lacqueraria. Sitting the pattern on the coffered ceiling, huge seawood fed with copper, burned green and orange, framed by the colored stone, in which sad lights a carved dolphin swam. Above the antique mantle was displayed, as though a window gave upon the sylvan scene, the change of Philomel by the barbarous king so rudely forced. Yet there the nightingale filled all the desert with inviolable voice, and still she cried, and still the world pursues, jug, jug, to dirty ears. And other whimpered stumps of time were told upon the walls. Staring forms leaned out, leaning, hushing the room enclosed. Footsteps shuffled on the stair. Under the firelight, under the brush, her hair, spread out in fiery points, glowed into words, then would be savagely still. My nerves are bad tonight, yes, bad. Stay with me. Speak to me. Why do you never speak? Speak! What are you thinking of? What thinking? What? I never know what you're thinking. Think! I think we are in Rat's Alley, where the dead men lost their bones. What is that noise? The wind under the door. What is that noise now? What is the wind doing? Nothing. Again, nothing. Do you know nothing? Do you see nothing? Do you remember nothing? I remember. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Are you alive or not? Is there nothing in your head? But oh, 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 that Shakespearean rag. It's so elegant, so intelligent. What shall I do now? What shall I do? I shall rush out as I am and walk the street with my hair down so. What shall we do tomorrow? What shall we ever do? The hot water at 10, and if it rains, a closed car at 4, and we shall play a game of chess, pressing lidless eyes and waiting for a knock upon the door. When Lil's husband got demobbed, I said, I didn't mince words. I said to her myself, hurry up, please, it's time. Now Albert's coming back. Make yourself a bit smart. He'll want to know what you've done with that money he gave you to get yourself some teeth. He did. I was there. You have them all out, Lil, and get a nice head, he said. I swear I can't bear to look at you. And no more can't I said, and think of poor Albert. He's been in the army 4 years. He wants a good time. And if you don't give it him, there's others will, I said. Oh, is there? She said. Something of that, I said. Then I'll know who to thank, she said, and gave me a straight look. Hurry up, please. It's time. If you don't like it, you can get on with it, I said. Others can pick and choose if you can't. But if Albert makes off, it won't be for lack of telling. You ought to be ashamed, I said, to look so antique, and her only 31. I can't help it, she said, pulling a long face. It's them pills I took to bring it off, she said. She's had 5 already and nearly died of young George. The chemist said it would be all right, but I've never been the same. You are a proper fool, I said. Well, if Albert won't leave you alone, there it is, I said. What you get married for if you don't want children? Hurry up, please, it's time. Well, that Sunday, Albert was home. They had a hat gammon, and they asked me into dinner to get the beauty of it hot. Hurry up, please, it's time. Hurry up, please, it's time. Good night, Bill. Good night, Lou. Good night, May. Good night. Ta-ta. Good night. Good night. Good night, ladies. Good night, sweet ladies. Good night. Good night.
Superb. Eduardo, really
Oh,
nice.
that is really wonderful, Eduardo.
I wish we had time for it all.
So
Yeah. Well, I
time.
guess people can listen to the recording and then, just reserve some time for that. What I was trying to say before, by the way, was just that usually we give people a little notice about Q&A so they can start posting their questions. How do you feel, Brian? I know you have one to ask, but
Well, we probably have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. And while we wait for them to come in, I just want to squeeze one final question in.
Exactly.
You've narrated some formidable titles, from Machiavelli's The Prince to War and Peace by Tolstoy to The Metamorphosis by Kafka, Dickinson's A Christmas Carol, and the Hebrew Bible. First of all, I want to say congratulations on being a notable finalist for the 2022 Audies in the same group as Oprah Winfrey, Barack Obama, Dave Grohl, Lin-Manuel Miranda, John Lithgow, Cynthia Erivo. What work of literature would you most like to tackle next? If you had your druthers.
That is a fantastic question.
Listen up, publishers. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'll tell you honestly, it's been done, unfortunately, too many times. I've always wanted to do Moby Dick.
Oh.
I just, Moby Dick. So there were, hopefully some questions are coming in, we'll get to them. So there were a handful of things that I came across in college that really kind of blew me away. One was Eliot, as I think I may have mentioned. The other was Joyce's Ulysses. And one of the others was Melville's Moby Dick. And it's one of the few books that I read like in a weekend. And it's not a small book, but once I started, I just could not stop. And I went through it, and it's always stayed with me. So that's one that's on my wish list. But again, there are multiple versions out there, and it's unlikely that anybody's going to say, oh, let's do a new one. So,
well, I think you should try.
Well, it's also, it's public domain, and I could just do it anyway.
Or how about we get Lin-Manuel to write something like that, and you wrap the whole thing.
I like it. A question
so
did.
speaking of the comments, like we have put a lot of information for people, and I know you mentioned there's a Wasteland app
Yeah.
for where you can just discuss the poem to your heart's content. And if people look up in the first third almost of the comments, there's a lot of that. I'm gonna try. Brian, did you see a question here? There's lots of praise coming in. Everyone's in love with your voice.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, many compliments. There was a question that was just posted though, Lawrence. Did you want to take that one?
About the cocktail party, or
Oh, no, okay, I'll field it. Have you had any feedback from the T.S. Eliot Foundation since they commissioned you to do this recording?
Yes, I've been in contact with them, and they seem very pleased with how it came out. And you asked earlier about the sort of nervousness about it. It was like I felt like I had to do this so that it would be Eliot approved. You know, it was almost like the man himself was sort of looking down from on high. And they're wonderful people over there at the foundation, and they take Eliot obviously very seriously, and they're very protective, as they should be, of how he's presented in the world. And so I was very gladdened when they were happy with it. So
that's good.
Yeah,
like the Samuel Beckett people, because I know they're very, you really don't want to go against what they.
We should also briefly mention that there is a Wasteland app through Faber and Faber for the iPhone only, as far as we know for now. And if you want to learn more about Eduardo and his work, you could visit his site, and even if you could put that up for our viewers.
And we have posted a lot of links to a lot of stuff that will be relevant to this whole subject. We were talking about, has the Wasteland ever been performed on stage, right? I guess we're waiting for Lin-Manuel Miranda on that one. Someone is asking about, he did write various plays, and somebody was asking about the cocktail party, which they feel contained a lot of the similar themes. And I think they're asking that you put that one on stage.
Oh, well, okay.
If you do it. I don't know if you're going to play all the roles or
this is going to be the sequel to The Producers somehow.
Right. So have we put out that new information for that you asked him to put in? Okay.
Yep, it's there. They posted it in the chat section, so our viewers can go to Eduardo's website and they can research for the app. And I think that's going to probably do it for us then.
Eduardo, it is always a pleasure.
This was so great, guys.
This is our fourth time, and we did Poetry Month a year ago, and this is it's always a pleasure to have you back.
And April Sandmeyer, who I mentioned earlier this evening, she just wrote, "Thank you so much. You made my birthday."
Oh, thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
So we're going to say good night. Thank you again.
Good weekend,
Good night,
everyone.